Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Productivity Mastery, the podcast that's bringing you some of the most inspiring leaders from all across the world. Today, I'm a lucky man because I'm joined by somebody that I would consider a role model, a very inspiring person coming from the country, the region that I was born at, Bulgaria. Momchil Kyurkchiev is the co-founder of Leanplum and currently chief strategy officer at CleverTap after the acquisition they went through. He's a kick-ass entrepreneur. His company Leanplum was ranked at some point a top three best places to work at Silicon Valley. He has the experience of raising close to 100 million euro or US, he'll tell me. And he's just this super inspiring people who likes to give back. So I'm super excited to interview him today. Momchil, how are you today, brother?
Doing very good, dude. You're making me blush here. So, you know, looking forward to chatting today.
Well, we shouldn't, man. You shouldn't. I'm really inspired and honored to be here with you. And those of you who are tuning in live on LinkedIn right now, I just want to invite you to post your questions in the chat. So we'll take some questions by the end of the episode. But let's maybe start from just kind of to break the ice a little bit.
Yeah,
Could you give me like a 2 minute brief overview? What do you do today as a chief strategy officer at the company? How does a week in your life in a working terms look like today?
yeah. So I'm essentially running the two regions of CleverTap, which is North America and Europe. That used to be the Leanplum region. So before the acquisition, um, so more or less kind of the same thing. Kind of new clothes though, because now it's CleverTap. And so I do a lot of I'm out in the market a lot. I'm a lot on LinkedIn. I'm a lot in customers, kind of um, using my network to kind of bring in business to us. What's interesting is, Leanplum was in business for about 10 years in the market, so we have pretty good awareness and brand. CleverTap has not been. So essentially, it feels a lot like the early days of Leanplum, where we have to do a lot of unscalable things. I, just kind of cracking the market open in a way and hustling. Just it feels like a 0 to 1 journey, which is exciting. Because it's been a few years for us. We kind of grew out of that in the early days of Leanplum. My day, it's obviously being part of a bigger company now, about 700 people, but a lot of making sure I kind of connect with the folks over in Europe and in India. But I also set aside a lot of time to talk to customers as well, right? So I'm on trips, I travel a lot. I'm in Europe about 1 week every month. I would say this month actually I'll be there 2 weeks. And but yeah, and that's about it.
So could you give us the brief overview of your story? A guy from Bulgaria moving to Bay Area. Like, how did you end up where you are today? You also had some short period. Well, actually, not a short period. You've been in Google for some time. So could
Right.
you give us the overview of how did that happen, and when was the moment for you to start on your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. I was basically the kind of the standard path of being a student in the U.S., right? So I ended up getting um, a scholarship. Essentially, it wasn't a full scholarship, so I had to work my way through college. But I left Bulgaria when I was 19, and I went to the U.S. I was in upstate New York, and I worked my way through college, did my degree in computer science and math, and eventually made my way into Google as an engineer, right? So kind of made my way to Silicon Valley, essentially planted a flag, and then 5 years later, I realized that all along I actually really wanted to start a company. But when you work for a company like Google, it's so easy to just get very comfortable. They really pamper you. They give you free food. It's a great place to work. It's amazing people you will get surrounded with. So, I at some point realized, hold on, if I just carry on, I could literally retire here. And I had this realization, and so eventually I just made my way out of Google, despite kind of all odds kind of weighing in the favor of staying. I kind of said, okay, I need to go, and I started my own company. And so that was actually my co-founder and I. We were both at Google. We sat next to each other in the same team, and ended up leaving, joined Techstars, and that was 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago. So that's the quick summary of the journey.
So initially, thinking of entrepreneurship, with all this hype around entrepreneurship, you probably were very excited. Like, was it the same? There's a lot of young people probably listening also right now. It's the cool thing to be an entrepreneur. Was it the same that you experienced, especially the first few years when you actually became one?
You know, I think it's entrepreneurship is cool, and to me, it's super important for entrepreneurs to exist because they're the people that really create the future, right? When you think about it, if you innovate, if you build something which is what's going to be in the future, there's no point of, for example, me coming from Bulgaria, and I really help a lot with the entrepreneurial ecosystem there and so on. But oftentimes we have this mindset that, oh, we have to catch up to the West, right? We have to be like them. No, what if you go where they need to go, right? Just create something, and then all of a sudden it flips, right? The West is catching up to us in a way, right? And that's always been like this, right? Everything, all the companies in the world, they were created by a founder at some point. Now you can't think of this, when you think of a really large corporation like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or one of those companies, but they had a founder, right? And somebody took a leap to not be comfortable. And so, I think to me the biggest kind of realization in a way is like, it's really hard to be an entrepreneur because when I started, not only is it taxing, I mean, it's obviously it's a lot of work, right? That's just a given. I remember when we started a company, in Techstars and beyond, like, we were literally working like 16-hour days, 7 days a week, like a real sprint, right? And that's the only way, because you have to basically do with two people what other companies can do with 10 in a much shorter time, right? So you have to put in the work. It's not cool. It's not like, you walk down this, bar and like everybody's like bowing to you because you're the entrepreneur. No, you're the guy who's laid up at night on Friday night, grinding it out, and basically getting blocked everywhere you go. And that's just the way it is. But that's also the rewarding part also, I think it takes, um, from a skill set, to me, the most important skill set I feel like is really being resourceful, because when you start a company, it's it almost feels like I have this, I don't know if it exists or not, but like I call it the rule of business, the business environment, that basically the business world has a status quo, and they want to make sure that no new thing pops in to the scene, right? So they're constantly trying to crush you, right? You can't hire your first employee because nobody wants to be a first employee. They'd rather be a founder, right? You can get a customer because the first customer doesn't want to be the first customer, right? They don't want to be the guinea pig. And you can get an investor because why would I be the first investor? I'd rather come in the second or the third one when it's proven thing, right? So everything you do feels like, the first thing you do, it feels like you have to grind and do it against all odds, right? So you have to be a fighter, and you have to be extremely resilient and creative and resourceful to make this work. And that's kind of the journey, right? Those 16-hour days weren't just, okay, we're going to code all day long and that's it, right? You have to basically block and tackle and figure out how to get something off the ground and build something out of nothing, right? But at the same time, that's also a very rewarding journey. And I think the entrepreneurial journey is, it's to me, it was kind of like my little, growing up in the Bulgaria in the 90s was, it was kind of an interesting time, because it's one of those things where you get liberated from communism, and all of a sudden there's this like explosion. Everybody wanted to build a company. I remember that very distinctly. Like even my parents, they opened up a little shop. Everybody's like trying different things. It was very high energy. And at the same time, it was hard because there was, we almost went bankrupt as a country. We had like 1,000% inflation. I remember like my mom's salary in 97 was something like $1 or $2 a month. Like, and it's one of those things where that's what it takes to build a company, right? You have to be extremely resourceful to make something out of nothing, and you have to grind and figure out a way to do it with basically no resources, right? It's very much like growing up in Eastern Europe in the 90s, very much like being an immigrant. I think, going there and trying to figure out a way to work your way through college, all these experiences I think help, um, and are really kind of representative of what it means to be an entrepreneur.
I love that you tweak the script and you talk about how we here in this region have to start seeing ourselves as pioneers and have a little bit more confidence about what we do instead of comparing ourselves and always putting ourselves as the Americans are the best and number one, and we try to catch up. What if we actually switch the script? And I wonder, because it's super interesting. You spend half of your life in Bulgaria and half of your life in the
Yeah.
US, um, and you've seen both worlds. For the listeners, many of whom are coming from this region, from Central and Eastern Europe, what did you say are some of the advantages that we're having here in terms of mentality, in terms of, you name it, talent, culture, anything? What do you see as some of the top advantages?
Honestly, I was talking to one of our investors a while back, and he made an observation that his best entrepreneurs are immigrants. And it's kind of odd because when you think about it, okay, in the US, most people, it's an entrepreneurial country, right? It's an immigrant country in a way. But there's also a lot of people who are born there. And so in some ways, being an immigrant is actually an advantage. And the reason for that is because being an immigrant is tough. Like, just leaving everything behind, going. I was 19 when I kind of showed up with a suitcase and literally, I think, I had $5,000 total, which was basically my parents' lifetime savings plus some more. And I paid up basically the difference for my first semester, which was $3,000. I bought a laptop and I had $1,000 left. And I had to basically work my way in the first semester so that I can actually stay for the second semester. Then I worked the second semester to get the third semester. Well, guess what? When you show up in the US, you have to wait 40 days to get a social security number, basically to be allowed to work. So all the jobs were gone. So how do you get around that? Well, you have to be resourceful, right? So I think we as a region in Eastern Europe, in Bulgaria, um, it's extremely advantageous to have gone through a time of having less, because to me that is what trains your mind to be creative, right? To get past obstacles. And I see this, when every time I go back, and I try to go back quite a bit in Bulgaria, like people, they don't just give up. They find ways. They fix things up. They basically, it's kind of ingrained in our culture in a way. And it's, I joked because we have this national kind of story about the Hitler Peter, if which is, it has some bad connotation to it, because they're always trying to break the system and whatever. But what's really cool is like, he's an entrepreneur, right? He figures out how to get what he needs. And somehow I think that's part of our culture, just, where we came from. And even during the Ottoman times, like, people figured out a way to get around things to get what they need. I think it's part of our DNA. And that's why I'm really hopeful. To me, a lot of the growth of Europe is going to be in Eastern Europe. And I think it's kind of because of the entrepreneurship and that spirit. And we just have to kind of encourage the people to kind of make that leap, and find the right people to build the things, right? Because talent is there, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. Just make sure that we have the right kind of mindset. It's not one of those things where you just show up and you're now an entrepreneur, you raise a seed round and everything's great. No, that's it's going to be a ton of work, but it's worth it, right? Because you're literally building the future of the country and the region.
For those of you who are not Bulgarian, Hitler Peter is translated as Smart Peter, and this
Or
is the guy,
clever, Peter. Yeah,
the witty Peter, maybe, I don't know.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And he's the guy who can always get around and figure out a way to sometimes tweak the system, so to say. But he is very entrepreneurial, I would agree. And I agree, Momchil. Here in the region, people are so good in survival, in kind of figuring things out, and especially on a small budget. I would say also people are usually very hardworking compared
Yeah,
to other regions. which we are sometimes getting for taking for granted.
Yeah.
So hardworking people, smart people, resilient people,
Mhm.
um, and if we can start believing a little bit more in ourselves, that we've got what it takes, I think we have a shot for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Those are the most important things when you start up. And also you need other things like you need an ecosystem, you need other founders, mentors, angel investors, funding, and all these things I've seen kind of pop in the whole region and in Bulgaria, especially because I have the most experience there. When we started up Leanplum back in 2012 or 2013, we got some angel money from Bulgaria, but then we started our office in 2014, and there was very few like startups in the whole region, right? And so we, over the years, have always tried to, create a like be a kind of a role model, speak, invite people, do meetups at our office, like things like that. And all of a sudden now you show up, there's like literally like I don't know how many, like 10 or 15 VCs right now in Sofia alone. And a lot of startups, some of the startups have gone and raised several rounds of funding. They've got a lot of growth potential. So it's just amazing to see that, basically that things have come along so far, and we're just getting started, right? This is literally just scratching the surface.
Definitely, there's a lot of positive energy and a lot of potential here. But let's get back to your journey. So we we paused a little bit in your on your story when you were at the beginning of the journey. You have this co-founder. You're very excited. You're joining Techstars. You guys are working hard. Now, what were some of the early lessons? Like, what should the founders listening, maybe early stage founders, pay attention to? If you can go back in time and give this piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
Um, I always recommend a book that I read that was kind of changed changed my perception completely of what it takes to build a company. It was called Four Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank. And the reason for that is because my biggest fear when I was starting my own company was that, okay, fine, we're gonna go build something, we're gonna toil away, we have a product, and then we go on the internet and we say, okay, here's our product, and then nobody's gonna pay attention and it's just gonna fizzle away, right? That was my biggest fear. Um, and I realized actually it's the other way around. You go and talk to people, your customers, you find what they need, what is the most burning need they have, that it's literally keeps them up at night, kind of thing, the most important thing. And then by definition, the moment you solve that need, you have a customer, right? And this notion of product development versus customer development is essential, right? So when we don't join Techstars, um, we actually spend a lot of time not building product but building, doing customer development. This concept of actually talking, going in front of customers, interviewing them, asking some fundamental questions about what their day to day looks like, and really tuning in on the core pain that you're solving, right? So that's probably the most important job. It's not really I mean, the product is also really important, but the product building, but that comes in my mind as a result of doing your job to really tune in on the pain that you want to solve, right? So
And you
that
actually
was my biggest kind of lesson in that way.
and you actually had a really cool story which I listened to in an interview, and I do think we featured your story in the book. This is the Spanish version, by the way,
Oh,
but
nice.
I don't have the English version here with me. But I think we featured that story in the chapter about focus and execution in
Mm.
early stages. Can you maybe share the story once again? It's the story that you and your co-founder, to validate your market, you went to this conference. If you remember the story,
Yeah.
if you can share it.
Yeah, so we walked in. Okay, so we're building a product, and the product was an A/B testing platform for mobile apps. Right, that was basically what it was. And why? Because we had built some A/B testing infrastructure over at Google. We knew how to build it, and we're thinking, okay, it's the best. It's always best to build a product for yourself, right? Because the customer, right? You're the customer. And so we were engineers. We're building an A/B testing platform. So, basically walking to Techstars to say, guys, you need to go talk to customers. And, what's the best way? Well, we literally, we can go and set up a bunch of meetings, or we just show up at a conference. And so there was actually a conference in town, literally second week. And it's a gaming conference. And I remember vividly, we said, okay, well, we're gonna just talk to everybody. It's a 200-person conference. It's 2 days. So we went down the list and we said, okay, my co-founder is going to do 100 people and I'm going to do 100 people. And what we did is we literally get one of those clipboards and I printed out the same questionnaire that Steve Blank asks in terms of questions when you do customer development, like things like, what does a day today look like for you? If you had a magic wand, what would you change? And then what about this product? Like if there was the product, like would you use it? Would you pay for it? Basically it's some of the most kind of discovery fundamental questions. And we printed those questions out and we showed up on the first day's morning and we started talking to everybody. And I like talking to people. I'm an extrovert, but I I really had to push myself to talk to 100 people in 2 days, right? I walk up to somebody as they're on their phone. I'm like, excuse me, can I talk to you? Just 1 minute. They're like looking at me like, why are you even talking to me? I'm like, well, why did you go to a conference? If you don't want to talk to anybody, just stay home, right? Might as well talk to me. So I pushed my way. I literally talked to, and like by the end of the second day, we literally covered everybody. And I walked down the hallway and everybody's like high fiving me. It's like, hey, Momchil, how's it going? Oh, good catching up. I haven't seen you since yesterday. Kind of thing. Everybody knew us. But the most important thing was by the end of the second day, we realized actually that our customer is not the right customer because I thought, the engineers are a customer. And then I started talking to engineers and they're all like, no, 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 I don't need your product. I can just build it. It's fine. They're like me, right? Builders. The people that had a need for us was the product managers. And I remember we were waiting in line to get lunch, and this one guy, product manager, right in front of us, he was our first customer. Eventually, he basically turns around and he's like, "Oh yeah, totally. I have this problem. Like I have to wait for the engineers to do things for me. I can't do my job. I really need a product like yours." I was like, "Oh wait, that's our customer, right?" So eventually, we pushed our way in and said, "Okay, can you use our product?" He's like, I don't have time. If you guys maybe just come to our office and just do all the work, we'll do it. I'm like, done, right? So it literally, that's what it took. And finding your customer is so essential because that's, as we said earlier, that's, by definition, now and you're building a product that actually solves a problem. So that was our biggest kind of discovery. And like in 2 days, we moved the company forward, 2 years, right? Um, so, I always recommend to when I advise startups and other things, like I always recommend just go find your industry conference. There's no better way to find everybody in one place and just talk to them. Like there's nothing quite like it.
I hope everybody pays good attention to the story and the lessons from it, especially those super talented, smart, tech-savvy founders that want to have this perfect piece of product before they show it to anybody and spend like 6 or 12 months to build before. Like, did you speak to any customers? No, but we don't have it ready yet. It's like, I mean, guys, listen. 2 days, 2 days, you talk to 200 people with your
Yep.
co-founder. Um, and then does it make sense at all? Should you build that or should it be something else? And
Right.
on top of that, you have a list of I don't know how many people that are potential customers, all customers, because they already know you. You
Yep.
made the connection. But I'm curious, Momchil, how did you, somebody who comes from a more technical engineering background, uh, decide to go to a 2 day conference and talk to 100 people? Like,
So look, I'm an engineer. I was an engineer at Google for 5 years, but I was always more than just an engineer. To me, the most kind of interesting part of engineering was to build something that people actually want to use, right? Even at Google, I remember my first job, I was an SRE, which is basically stands for Site Reliability Engineering, and I was basically responsible for Google search. I had a pager. Um, I was on call. There was only 20 of us in all of Google who were on call to make sure that the Google search doesn't go down, right? So it felt like it's one of those like the ER movie, like the doctor, they're on call, they have the pager buzzes, and then you have to go and like fix the problem, right? No sleep. But it's funny because I soon realized, okay, well, we're doing a lot of manual work, so I had to automate. I had to build things. I basically wanted to automate all the work that I do every week because we had to release new software and make sure that it gets released properly. So I started a company. Sorry, I started a project called Sisyphus, which the idea was we're gonna have this boulder we're gonna push every week to roll out the binary of the Google search, the new version of Google search every week. And it always felt like we push it up the top and then it keeps rolling back, and then we have to do it again every week. So we said, okay, well, let's automate it. And I basically I started this project, recruited a couple of coworkers to work on it, but then I also started interviewing people. I went and interviewed all the internal teams at Google that do their own releases. It's like Gmail and like Google Image Search and a bunch of others, and started basically doing exactly what customer development is without knowing that's what it is. Right? Intuitively, I knew if I want to build a really good tool, I need to go talk to people who want to use it. And there were three different teams working on uh, such software. There was one Swiss team, there was some other team, and us, and then we just built it for ourselves. We interviewed people. I got 40 people to use it eventually, and I ended up moving to YouTube. And kind of the project I kind of lost track of. Right, it's Google, it's a big company, so you don't really, years later, I'm reading this book called Site Reliability Engineering from Google. Like one of my boss's boss wrote a book. And in the book, they say, and by the way, our kind of standard practice nowadays to roll out software is called Sisyphus. And I'm like, what? How did I not know about this? So turns out, of the three options, mine was the one that ended up winning and became the standard for rolling out software in all of Google. So two lessons. One is being an entrepreneur and like basically talking to your customer is good. And second, how did I not know being the founder? Like, I guarantee nobody knows I started this project. Like, I'm the only person who knows. So being in a big company, that's what it feels sometimes, right? Like,
Now it's more
they,
of us. Momchil, now it's more of us. All of the listeners here. We all know, man. We're going to share.
yeah, maybe, yeah, sure. But like, that's besides the point, right? That's, the impact that you have as a startup, right? Being able to really change things out in the market
Mm.
versus being in a big company, that's the difference, right? So, that's my little lesson.
Oh, it's actually great that you had the opportunity to work in a great company, tech company, that you can learn actually being on a paycheck, on a salary, as opposed to
Yeah.
starting from the ground. I mean, many people are starting their companies straight out of university, which could be a good thing, but in
Yeah.
your way, you could have learned many lessons before you entered the entrepreneurial scene.
I heard this in Techstars actually. They said there's two types of companies. There's B2B and B2C companies, right? In the B2C world, founders solve problems in their personal life, right? So for example, I have a friend who started a dating app, and I'm sure had some dating issues, so she's built a dating app, and that's good. Um, for B2B companies, you're solving a problem from your previous employer. So for me, it was very much the same, right? We basically got to a place where we were building this A/B testing infrastructure, and it was all web driven and no mobile at all, and we couldn't actually solve this at Google. I ended up leaving, but it's actually pretty important. Like if you are starting in the B2B world, it is important to kind of see things firsthand in a bigger company and develop ideas of kind of the core pains that these companies develop and so on.
Let's talk about culture. You are somebody that is a big proponent of people first culture. I've been inspired by some of the practices that you guys have been incorporating. But when was it the first time you genuinely realized culture is important? And then the follow up question to that is, when did you start paying attention to culture in your own startup?
I'll bring you all the way back actually to 2012, 2013 time. That right when we started was my co-founder and I, and in the first year it was actually pretty tough because we raised a seed round of funding. It was like close to $1 million, and then we kept hiring people and they weren't working out. Like we got one guy more on the business side, we got one more on the engineering side, and like it just we parted ways, and I'm like, I'm doing a really bad job, as a founder, because I keep like getting the wrong people, and like it's bad, like I can't get anything done. And then years later I realized, okay, well, eventually we actually got somebody who was really good, and then they brought in somebody else, and the company grew. But what we were really struggling with is finding the right people from a cultural fit. And maybe I realized that it was actually a good thing that the company had a really strong culture from the early days, and it was not working out with the wrong fit of people, like just to kind of find our way to the right set of early founding team that you can kind of bet on to actually build a company together, right? The first kind of 5 to 10 employees are essential, right? Um, and I very distinctly remember, like, you know, um, it was maybe like 6 months into the company's existence. Like I was talking to my co-founder, we had just met somebody, and we're like, we're hiring people now. We should probably have a culture. So we built a culture deck, culture.ppt, and I actually looked at it recently just for the fun of it. But we're like, okay, yeah, what is it like? Okay, well, we're gonna put in these values here, and and it was very easy. Like we did it in 30 minutes, and um, but later I realized that essentially the culture is nothing more than the values of the founders, right? Just one of the perks of being a founder is you get to set the culture. We ended up writing it down, and that really helped us kind of be a culture-driven company in a way with values that represented who we are, and then that actually helped us attract the right kind of people along the way. And when we actually did that, the company took off, right? So that was a really kind of important thing for us. It was, we felt like it wasn't really a big deal. In retrospect, it was actually, you know, one of those things that really made a difference.
When was that? How long after you started?
About 6 months in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And after you did, you paid attention to that every time you had to hire somebody new.
Yeah, I mean, paid attention, spoke to them about it, assessed it, right? We learned to be really good at kind of assessing. And yeah, I mean, the problem was like when we were hiring the first few people, like we were just kind of bringing in people, we interviewing with technical skills, right? Or yeah, this person knows how to do X. But then the cultural piece is really important. So we ended up instituting a culture interview as part of the whole process. And then also when we started getting the right people in, they started referring people who are like that, right? From a cultural perspective. So that kind of even reinforced the culture even more, right? So that's kind of how it kind of evolved.
Maybe if you can expand on the topic of talent attraction. I had a conversation on this podcast with the first chief HR officer at LinkedIn, Steve Cadigan,
Mm,
and he was sharing different pieces of advice on what did they do in the early days when they did not have the paycheck to offer and they had to use different type of strategies to attract top talent. What would be your advice to startups that do not necessarily have the means to offer a fat paycheck, and how do you compete on getting the top talent?
yeah, I mean, it was lead by example, right? So my co-founder and I didn't really pay ourselves salaries at the very beginning, just to save on the cash. The people we brought in were way below market, but we gave them equity, right? And so there's this mercenary versus missionary aspect, right? So how do you find people who really want to be in a startup, right? Because it's not for everybody, right? It's tough. It's a roller coaster for emotions. You have to work really long. It's not a 9 to 5 job, but you can't change the world in a 9 to 5 job, right? So you have to be able to kind of have that kind of mindset, the missionary mindset, and it kind of self selects the right kind of people there, right? So that's always a kind of a signal to me. If somebody's just coming in the early days just to get a good paycheck, that's not the right place, right? There's much better places to go to get a good paycheck, right? Google's one of them. There's others, but in Google, you're gonna be, for me at least, I was employee number 20,450, right? I had a number, um, and in my project that I started made a huge difference. I didn't even know about it. That's the difference.
Hmm. I'm just curious. I don't know if you can give me a number, but after you set the values in place and in the next 3 years, what percentage of the new people you brought in, came out of referrals from people that you already had, as opposed to external people that you attracted?
I think it was at least half,
Hmm.
at least half. And that's super important, actually. Yeah. So either mentors in our network, yeah, you have to use your network to hire, and like the first employees are the best ambassadors to bring in new people.
I have a confession to make. Uh, 2 or 3 years ago, one of your employees, Ani Koleva,
Uh-huh.
and if you're listening,
Annie's great.
Annie's great. Uh, she speaks highly of you, and she sent me some of your interviews when we were publishing the first book, so I can pick some examples for the book. And I started reading the interviews, and something stuck with me, and I have to share it because I really believe in it, but never thought about it before.
Hmm.
There was a few interviews, and I'm not even sure if I took you right, but that's what I got.
Well, let's just
So,
see.
so what I got is your philosophy is that for a team to work well, people have to build great relationships with each other. You have to create this culture of friendship and relationships. So,
Hmm.
um, talk to me about that. Did I get you right? First of all,
Yeah, it
and
is. Yeah,
yeah,
it
just
it
expand on
is.
that.
Yeah, it's this really so kind of fundamentally, it's a tug of war, right? Because you build amazing rapport. A small team can, basically of 10 people can achieve anything out there, right? So you're working really long hours. You have to build that relationship. And I realized soon after that if we really build trust and we feel like not like a family but more like a sports team,
Mm,
that kind of mindset where you have a goal and you have to win together. But on a sports team everybody's high-fiving each other. They really together, right, in it together to win. They really get depressed when they lose, and they want to win and they give their best. That's what it feels like. And we started to do things in our culture to foster those relationships on purpose, right? And it actually started with a little practice we did early in the days, in Techstars. We basically had this ritual, and our guy, our managing director at the time, he was great. He was Andy Sack, in Seattle. He instituted every Thursday at 11:11, which was 11 p.m., 11 minutes. Um, Basically, we all gathered, all the 10 startups in the batch, gathered together. Everybody got a shot of whiskey, and then everybody started sharing their high and low of the week. That was it, right? Very simple, right? That's it. But it's the amount of bonding you get, the amount of empathy from to see, okay, fellow founders, what do they struggle with? How can I help you? And just building that, there's been some amazing friendships. And I was like, okay, well, this really breaks the barrier, right? So what if I actually do that at Leanplum? And then we started doing that from the very beginning, like every Friday, I think we started doing it. But like we got together, like with the early employees, everybody sharing. I still do it to this day on my team, right? It makes it, it's one of those little things where, um, basically, if you can build that trust with the team, then you're one team, you're one unit, you're going to go win together, right? You're not just checking in to do your job. You actually mentally, emotionally invested to help your employees, right? And that's basically, so obviously it didn't scale because once we get past 20 people, then all of a sudden it takes like an hour to go around the room and everybody to share their high and low, let alone when we're 100 people, right? So we had to adapt it, right? We had to change things, like, as we scaled, we figured out other ways to do the little things. But building that relationship actually turned out to be really important. And then later I realized that I didn't know this. I mean, I was just doing this out of intuition, but there's a lot of different styles of companies out there. But our company was a commitment-based culture, meaning people are in the company because of the people, and they win together, and they want to be in the company because of that. Um, and that's what we fostered essentially. And there's been research, actually. I think this all these management consultants, they interview companies and they try to assess culture. By the way, this is not the only type of culture. There's also a hub and spokes culture where, I told you what to do and you do it, kind of thing. Or there's a check in and out culture where I pay you, I do my job, I leave, I go home, kind of thing, right? There's a lot of different kinds of cultures. um, and our culture was a commitment culture. And what they found is that the companies with commitment-based cultures have the highest likelihood of success because of the fact that they endure hardship the best. Because when things get tough, when your sports team starts to lose the games, you don't just run away. You actually fight together. You fight back. You win together as a team. So having that element actually has helped us through the years. And that's what we realized we were building, in retrospect, right? Not at the time, but it's really helped us to go tackle and, like, basically build a company together.
that is
So the
super.
culture piece is Yeah,
That is super
that's,
interesting. If you can dive a little bit deeper into that. So okay, it was a retrospect. In retrospect, you realize you built such a culture, but now that you can reflect on it, what exact mindsets, practices that you did that contributed for the creation of such a culture?
I mean, I think, we had these little like rituals, like, for example, when we ended up not like being able to go around the room and share all the highs and lows, we started doing based on team, right? And we reinforced it part of the culture interview that I mentioned. We've had a lot of people, like, sometimes you hire the wrong kind of people, and they actually, a lot of times they leave, because they just don't feel like, they fit, they belong to what we're trying to do. So I think that's really important. We had these little games that we instituted. It was called Big Talk. So there was like this stack of cards that you can actually order on the internet. It's like a cards with, I don't know, 40, 50 questions. And when we do like a little offsite, quarterly planning offsite, we always did like a little game where we go around the room and you draw a card and you have to answer the question. But the questions are hard, right? They're not like, hey, what did you do yesterday? They're like, what is really most meaningful to you in your life? Or tell us about, you know, how, what drives you? Or, what, how do you, how did you fail in your life in a way that you can share with us, and what did you learn from that, right? So deep, deep, deep stuff. And a lot of people, like, I remember I would hire somebody on the team and they're like, oh, we do this little thing, and like they're like, oh, what, I need to review myself now. I'm like, yeah, you kind of have to, because we're gonna have to go really hard here, and if we just kind of know each other a little bit, it's not gonna work, right? So I think those little things really made a difference. That's essentially how we ended up getting featured on Best Place to Work. It's basically an interview. Like, they go and interview, like, I don't know, 20, 30 people in the company. And at one point we were like a top 3 best place to work, because of the fact that, people were driving hard, like people were working really hard, but they also enjoyed it because they were, on a team that wants to win, and we were winning, and we were fighting back when we're not winning together. And it felt like a real thing, right? But we kind of engineered it that way as we grow, to kind of figure out how to keep the culture going, right?
I love it, man. I love the fact that you are sharing. It's about the rituals you create. It's about the. There's no magic pill. Like, there's the one thing that will change your culture forever. But instead, it's the commitment. It's the mindset. It's the rituals that you do on a regular basis that end up, seen in retrospect, creating this type of commitment culture.
Yeah, because I actually think quite a bit about this, right? So, they always say, well, big company, it's hard to have a culture, right? But, countries have cultures. And the reason for that is not because, like, if you're in a big country, right, you do little rituals, right? This is what we do at Easter, this is what we do at whatever. Those are the rituals. So people have forgot about why we started those rituals, but there was a reason they got started, right? And I think that's the realization when you're starting a company. You kind of have that mindset. As the company grows, what's left is the rituals, but they're there for a reason. And I think that's basically what that was my realization, is like, there's culture scales. It's just that, you have to kind of embody it in the little things you do on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Is there any other practice, just to wrap up this topic? Any other practice or ritual, something that's tangible that maybe you can share that you and your co-founders did, or somebody else from the company?
Well, we kept doing the whiskey shot. I don't know if that helped or hurt. But startups are very stressful. So, you sometimes have to let steam. We work really, really hard, and to this day, yeah, I think, yeah,
Tell
yeah. I
me,
mean,
the whiskey
yeah.
shot. This is the third Thursday Thursday night kind of, like what is the ritual? How does it look like?
I mean, it literally, like, you get around the circle and like basically just sharing your high and low. Um, Obviously, the whiskey shot was probably meant to help people kind of loosen up, but it is what it is. Yeah, it's just, I recommend you try it, right? It's very it's the little things that really make a big difference. I'm doing this on my team. We gather, for example, once a week, me and my leadership team, like we get together, we go, I bring them out to lunch. And during the lunch, like we just spend an hour together, and the only topic is like highs and lows, right, of the week.
Hmm.
And it's amazing because there's so much you unearth because you're in the same meetings every day, right? You're grinding it away, you're on email threads, but you don't actually get to see how people feel, right? What is it, how do they actually react? Like what's bothering them? What keeps them up at night? And that empathy that you build through little things like what I mentioned, it goes so much about building trust, right? It's kind of like that, basically there was this relationship triangle that I read about a long time ago, which was, at the very top is the relationship. And you mentioned, right, in our culture, relationships are key. The relationship triangle is at the top. The middle part of the triangle is trust, but then the bottom is the broad base of communication, right? And having that communication empathy that you build, fostering that, finding ways to do that is really important. Being a leader, right? Being a founder of a company. That's what leads to the relationship at the very top, right? That's the last thing, really, right?
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. And talking about communication and talking about trust, I want to lean towards a topic that, as you know, I'm very interested about these days, the topic of crisis. Me and my co-author Cristobal Alonso are just wrapping up our second book called Perform in Times of Crisis. If you see more white hair, you have a you have an idea. uh, many greetings to our editor that's sending me great comments and address. So, but just to talk about crisis, like being an entrepreneur is, some people would say it's a non-stop being in a crisis mode, and like there's new things every day, there's new unexpected challenges every day. um can you think of any examples of sort of like more major challenges or crises you had with your co-founder, with your team, and maybe if you can share what helped you through these times?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that kind of the key to entrepreneurship is the resilience and not giving up, right? Because I was reading there's basically this biography book that it just came out about Elon Musk, and he talks a lot about how like he literally didn't have money in the bank to pay people next week, but now all of a sudden you have companies like Tesla that are one of the most valuable companies in the world, right? So you can think in a parallel universe he could have just been like, I'm just going to give up, it's too much work, and I'll do something else, and then no Tesla, right? That's it. You can't change the world, you can't shift to electric future. And it's little things like that, being an entrepreneur every day, right? I always talk about kind of the roller coaster, right? It's when I quit my job at Google, I remember like it felt like you basically get plugged into the fire hose of Silicon Valley, right? That's what it felt like, because like Google, like you're very insulated, right? It's kind of like the North Korean weather forecast. It's always sunny all the time, right? Everything's good. Don't worry. Just keep doing your job. Happy times, right? And then all of a sudden you go into the real world of the valley, right? Which the valley is a startup valley, right? Obviously there's big companies, tech companies, but they're the outcome, right? They're not the norm. They're not the culture. And I was insulated from that. And when you start drinking from a fire hose, you realize, oh wow, like you actually, when you're building a company, it's everything is just exponential. Like the highs are super high, the lows are really low, right? I remember when we first got featured on TechCrunch, and it was like I was like almost flying, right? Just so proud of myself and the team, and like we got like 10 or 12 different publications to help us with our launch. And then the next day, sometimes in the same day, you have this thing you're building, and a customer is trying to close, and all of a sudden they say no, and you're like, okay, we're gonna die, right? This is it, right, guys? We it just the emotion and being depressed about, literally on the same day, you're feeling like bipolar, right? In a way, like that's what an entrepreneur is like feels like. And I'll just give you an example, right? So when we started fundraising, our first round of funding, and I had never raised any money in my life, right? And I'm basically raising a seed round of funding. We did Techstars. It's great. We did the pitch. We also found a way to kind of rank our way into Angel List, which is this big website community for fundraising. And we were at one point, for 1 week, we were the top trending startup worldwide. And so when the emails go out worldwide, there's, basically the top featured startups to look at, and Leanplum's right there. And we got a lot of interest, right? We got a Polish guy, got a guy from Bangladesh, like from all these random places people wanted to put in money. And it's awesome, right? Momentum's great. And then, we raised, I think, like maybe 400K out of the 800. And then all of a sudden, nobody's responding to me. Like, it was kind of toward the end of November. Like, all of a sudden, like, uh, you know, basically I keep emailing people, and like we completely stalled from end of, middle of November, I would say, until end of December. Not a single check came in. And I'm sitting there, and like it's a month and a half. It's clearly my job to fundraise, right? Because I'm the CEO, and I can't do it. And I'm like, every week I go and I'm banging my head. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fail this, right? This is just not gonna work because we can't start a company with half the round, right? I can't hire enough people. It's gonna look bad. Like, I went out to raise 800. I've only raised 400. It just sends all these bad signals. Like there was one of those moments, like my reality check, like literally felt like crying, right? Just couldn't figure it out. And then I just kept trying and trying and trying and trying. And in what time, that was actually back in this, I had met the president of Bulgaria earlier on. He had basically gone to visit, this is Plevneliev, way
Mm.
back. He went to visit Silicon Valley, and he went to Google campus. He met the Bulgarians there. And I met him, and I got this invite in my inbox that, he was inviting entrepreneurs from around the world to come and basically visit for the Christmas holiday, right? He just had a little reception. And I'm like, I'm going, I'm gonna go and like just basically network. And I show up, and I kid you not, within a few days, I had raised another third of my round, because I ended up meeting our Bulgarian investors, people like Lubin from Launch Hub, and he introduced me to somebody else. He introduced me to some people from San Francisco. I had met Bulgarian guys, uh, and all of a sudden, everything started to roll. And then first comes around, New Year, and a lot of people started responding to me. We got this French investor. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, now we're back. Like, if you're interested." It all of a sudden, within 5 days, everything else filled up the round, right? In retrospect, I realized VCs have this thing where past Thanksgiving, they kind of check out, basically end of November, December, they don't really make investments. I didn't know this, for me, it's like an existential crisis. And, but, those 45 days were complete torture, right? I was just, setting up meetings. I had a list of 160 people, and I literally found ways to talk to every one of them in 45 days. And I kept hearing no's and no's and no's and no's and no's. Like it kind of builds a little bit of a thick skin eventually. But I was like, I'm not here for the no's, guys. I just need 20 yeses or so, and just not giving up. And eventually, basically trying my luck with this reception thing, and it just unlocked. And we were off to the races. Come January 5th, right? But that was basically literally one of my first lessons of, hey, this is not going to be easy. Clearly, I'm going to have to do things that are just hard, and I can't give up, right? I don't have an option to just, hey, I'm just going to call it quits, do something else with my life. I was like, no, I need to make this work. So anyway, that was my little example right from the very beginning.
And I've interviewed now more than 250 successful people like yourself, and this topic of not giving up is recurring topic. Like even in the kind of the darkest kind of moments. So there's the two things that I'm taking out of this story. One is just keep going,
Yeah.
keep going to the end. That's one, and the second one, which has been a learning for me as well, is sometimes when you feel like you're stuck, maybe you gotta shift your approach a little bit. I mean, you went on this reception, which is like probably not the usual place to be, but
No.
it's a little bit different than you pushing and not
Yeah.
getting any replies, right?
Yeah, you have to, the resourceful part, that's the second piece, right? Not giving up, and you have to be resourceful. Like, you have to figure out other ways to do things. And that's kind of a good example of everything else that you do in a startup, right? How do you get your first customer? How do you get your first employee? How do you get your funding secured eventually? And growing and like all that, you constantly have to figure out ways to do things that are not the usual way, right? Because if it was the usual way, everybody would do it, right? Clearly, that's not how it works.
It's super interesting because you spoke the first time I had to raise, but if you think about it, every time you raised, you've been raising a different round. So it was the first
Right.
time. Then
Yep.
you had to go through a acquisition, which is the
Yep.
first time. What would you say are your learnings? Did you kind of acquire this mindset of, you know, even if it's a new thing, I'll figure it out? Like now maybe you have the experience. Like what how do you deal with newness and uncertainty these days?
I mean, it was stressful. Like I remember when my first son was born, like literally the next week after I raised our first round of funding. That was an institutional round of funding, the Series A, and I was so stressed out. Like I was talking to basically mentors, like the investor. I I was locking myself up. We had this closet. It's in the office we had basically like two conference room and a closet, and I was living in the closet basically because I didn't want to use up the conference rooms. And I would just like sit in this closet with a bunch of boxes, and I'm talking on the phone, negotiating millions of dollars. Like I couldn't get out of this closet for like weeks, and we eventually worked out. But like you just, I don't know, like it was different every time we raised. It was different, because the Series A, it was we had an investor that came in inbound. The Series B, it was hard. Like we had to basically talk to a lot of investors. We had to grind our way, and change our strategy midway. For Series C, it was a little different. Series D and so on, like it was kind of like the common thread is basically it's a lot of stress, and you kind of have to kind of take it, and you have to take care of yourself. It's one of those lessons I learned actually, in the very first days. I remember our managing director for Techstars. He said, "Hey guys, you're gonna work 16-hour days, 7 days a week. That's a given. Just make sure you put in a good 30 minutes on the on on the elliptical, or like you go running, whatever, like some cardio, because you need to get sleep and you need to get an exercise, because otherwise it's just you can't physically endure, right? You're gonna have to endure. And so just making sure your physiology is in good shape, that's a good thing. And I run in the morning, I do exercise, so those little things actually make a difference. But that's only to make sure that you don't go nuts.
I know the chapter about the mental state in times of crisis. I started the chapter, and the book is not published yet, but I'm happy you're verifying it. I started a chapter with reminding founders that you gotta pay attention to your mind, your body, and
Mm.
then your support network, the people around you that you can. And I'm wondering about the third piece, the support network. um has that been something that played a role? And when I mean support network, that could be your co-founders, it could be friends, it could be your partner, mentors, coaches, like mastermind group.
Yeah.
Has that been an important part for you, and in what way
Yeah.
do you utilize the support network?
I mean, it's the most important support network is your co-founder, right? That's why it's immensely harder to start a company without a co-founder. And at the same time, the reason why companies fail, the number one reason for startups to fail, is co-founder issues, right? That's the flip side of it, right? Being, my co-founder and I, like, we fought hard, right? We yell at each other, like we couldn't figure out things, like we were just passionate. But I trusted the guy that anything we do, he wanted to do the right thing for the company. I had zero ever thoughts in my mind that he had other motive, right? And it was the same way both ways. And when I'm low, he would help me pull out. Like then he's in the low. Like it was essential, right? Having that relationship, like you literally spend 16 hours of your day, 7 days a week with this other person, like more time than your wife, more time than your kids eventually, right? Um, and it's super important. It's super important.
Love it, man. Man, the time flies. It's 1 hour now.
Yep.
Crazy. I have only 69 more questions to ask.
All right. Shoot
I,
away.
I'll be super happy to have you back, but I also want to respect your time, and I know that Now it's for me it's Friday evening, but for you it's Friday morning, and you probably have huge a huge day ahead of you. But just a final question to wrap it up, because this podcast is about productivity. What would be your um, productivity tips, for example, when it comes to time management, organizing your time? How do you make sure that you stay on top of things and focus on the things that matter?
Yeah, focus is probably like physiology is probably one thing that's super important. The other one is focus, right? And I actually do that intentionally quite a bit, right? You know, um, for example, I organize my meetings, like if I have one-on-ones, I try to cluster them just to, not randomly, so I can have time for focus. Um, you know, um, I also think quite a bit when I have my staff meeting. Okay, what is our North Star, right? I always ask the question like, what are we actually trying to do? And it's really hard, like, because there's a lot of different things in a company, right? There's all these little things you have to do, but at the end of the day, what's really going to make a difference? And then when we actually have a clarity of what we're actually trying to do, then I try to visualize it, right? So for example, right next to my desk right now, we have this big thing right now. We have a conference coming up. The biggest gaming conference, gaming developer conference, is in at the end of March. It's exactly a month from now. And so I literally have a little meter next to my desk, and it's got like all the people that we need to invite or register for our event. And every day, everybody that passes by my desk, they see this meter, and it creeps up every day, little by little. But when it was at zero, it was kind of nerve-wracking, and now it's started to climb up, but we're behind, and now we're going to have to catch up. So it really rallies the team. Focus sometimes is just little things like that, right? You just kind of visualize it, and all of a sudden it creates accountability for the team. It people realize, okay, this is what we need to do. If I'm spending my time on something else, probably not a good idea. So things like that. From a personal productivity, I manage a lot of tasks, so I kind of follow this kind of GTD, getting things done frameworks. I have a little plugin for my Notion. It's kind of managing essentially an inbox, and then trying to allocate things, delegate things, follow up, like all the tasks. Because you can go nuts otherwise. Like if I don't dump my brain out at the end of the day, I just can't sleep with all the things that are need to get done, right? So I do that, right? So just for my own personal mental health, right? But I
Mm.
manage that through that little system that I've built.
Yeah, we had David Allen on the podcast previously, and I think one of the key components of GTD is to get things out of your head,
Yes,
trusting
it physically feels like the moment you write something down, I can feel the stress level go down, right? Even though it hasn't been done, right? I still need to do the thing. No, at least I just don't have to remember it. So yeah, that's my little trick.
I'm just curious, what percentage of your time do you spend on execution, personally getting things done, sending emails, doing stuff, as opposed to in management time, delegating, managing, coaching, giving feedback, leading others?
I mean, I have to do both, but I'm a lead from the front person, and I think it really makes a difference where you are at the stage of a company, right? So if you're in like a 0 to 1 journey, you have to do everything, right? Um, and I do it, and I mentioned, when we started that, like where we are right now with CleverTap in the North American market, like it very much feels like the early days of Leanplum, which is fun, but at the same time, I'm doing a lot of things myself, right, personally, and I'm a very hands-on like founder type. I think all founders are. But then as you scale, like as you build your team, then you have to find leaders, and you have leaders who lead others, and then you should make sure you still kind of focus. You create the focus of what needs to get blocked and tackled. So kind of putting a spotlight on things, getting really deep. But then you have to also kind of trust that you build a system, and then you have basically OKRs, and like manage the outcomes and help people get them blocked and so on, right? So it kind of scales that way, right? But right where my mindset is right now is very much in the kind of hands-on execution at the moment.
Momchil, thank you so much for being with us. I just want to take a moment to say thank you for who you are, not just being a role model, being a story of success that we can follow, but somebody who's really humble and who is showing up and giving your time in so many places to be able to share and inspire others. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And just if you, I want to give you just a minute to share with us what are you guys up to these days? How can you support with the product that you have, founders, startups, and everybody else out there?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we're building a customer engagement platform, so very much like Leanplum, but at a much bigger scale now. We joined forces with CleverTap, and to me, CleverTap is probably one of the most innovative companies in the space. The problem is most people haven't heard of it, right? Because they grew up in the rest of the world, meaning like Asia, Middle East, Latin America. It's mobile first regions, working with some of the largest apps on earth that routinely have like 500 million people using those apps, like telco apps and video streaming and fintech and so on. So my job right now is literally to go and tell the North America, European markets that we exist. I spend a lot of time kind of evangelizing. I call it the crack the market open. And when we show our product, people get really excited, because we work with a lot of apps, I would say. But it's everybody's nowadays kind of tightening the belt. We've gone from the excesses of post-COVID or middle of COVID to now efficiency play, and people need to focus on retention. They need to focus on engagement, and that's where we come in, and that's what we play with, and that's what I do day in day out.
Keep on doing it, man. Keep on doing it. And keep inspiring. Thanks everybody to for being with us today at the Productivity Master podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 173 more you can find on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend and keep performing. See you guys next time.
Thank you for what you guys do.